So my name is Karl Jeffery. I'm the publisher of Carbon Capture Journal in London, and our webinar today is sponsored by Decarb Connect. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to hear today from executives from 3 companies talking about their CO2 storage projects. So as it happens, they're all based in Houston, and all 3 companies have Class 6 injection well permits in the application process. First, we're going to hear from Chris Davis, who's Senior Vice President of Milestone Carbon. They're developing CO2 injection hubs in the Permian Basin of West Texas. Milestone call themselves an energy waste sequestration company. They're also handling drilling waste, slurry, landfill, and all kinds of industrial waste. And Chris is a former commercial manager and reservoir engineer with ExxonMobil. And second, we'll hear from Charles Fridge, who's chairman and CEO of Verda CO2. They say they've got a large, diverse, and advanced portfolio of CCS projects in the US, and they're on the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana. Charles was previously CEO of Throne Petroleum Resources. And finally, we'll hear from William Graham Payne, who's Director of Energy Transition with Caliche. They focus on underground storage of natural gas and industrial gases, as well as CO2. And Graham formerly worked at SLB and Battelle as a geologist, mainly in CO2 storage. So we're looking today to get a better understanding, particularly of how the CO2 storage business case might work and how the injection well permit application process is going. We're going to structure the webinar as a series of 10-minute interviews with me, so asking questions to Chris, Charles and Graham in turn, and then we'll take questions from you in the audience. You can put your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and please say who the question is for. And perhaps answer questions while typing, while they're not speaking, of course, or we'll take them at the end. And you can upvote other people's questions. If there's a lot of questions, that might help us working out which ones are most important. So first, I'd like to invite Chris Davis from Milestone to explain about his project. So I'll invite Charles and Graham if you want to turn your cameras off during this section. So we'll go to Chris. And would you like to do a quick introduction of your company and your interesting business model on sequestering all kinds of waste from the energy sector?
Absolutely, Karl. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and to be with these other gentlemen. Milestone Carbon was established about 3 years ago, really to focus on onshore carbon sequestration, partnering with heavy industry and other energy producers to help them with their carbon abatement goals. And so we're one of 3 different companies within the Milestone group. So we have an energy waste company that operates 12 different sites across the Permian Basin, Eagle Ford, and Haynesville production areas. So this is primarily handling oil field waste with deep injection wells and some complementary engineered landfills. So we've been doing this for 10 years. We're a company that's about 250 staff, many of those in our operating sites. The carbon business was set up to assist with partners who wanted to decarbonize with CCS, carbon capture and sequestration. To that end, Milestone Carbon is establishing carbon hubs near these emitters and industrial companies to help them, as cost effectively as we can to capture and sequester their emissions here in the next 3 to 5 years. We also have an industrial waste division as one of the other Milestone groups, and so really Milestone's really aim is to be a sustainable infrastructure company that partners with energy and heavy industry to help them with their sustainability goals, and in particular with carbon abatement and attaining their net zero goals. So to that end, Milestone Carbon has established 2 different hubs in the Permian Basin, which is where we have most of our operating sites. So we have a site in the Delaware Basin, which I can talk more about here shortly, and then one in the Midland Basin. We've leased up over 40,000 acres in these locations. We have multiple Class 6 wells that are in the queue at the EPA that have been deemed administratively complete, and they're at different stages of progression through the technical review process. We also have an existing Class 2 approved permit for CO2 injection, and we have other Class 2 wells in with the Railroad Commission as well. And as many know, for oil and gas related activities, we can use, in Texas at least, Class 2 wells for smaller volumes of CO2 sequestration. That's been done here for quite some time. And so we're using that as a pathway to get emissions into the ground earlier, but at the same time, in parallel, we're going through the more lengthy process of getting Class 6 wells permitted. And really the types of emissions that we're looking at, if you're familiar with Texas and sort of the oil and gas production areas, which I'm sure many are, there are scores of gas processing facilities that are extracting carbon dioxide from existing natural gas streams, and so they have to do that. That's done using technology that's been around for many decades now, and that CO2 is typically, but not always, but typically it's vented into the atmosphere, and so there are many sources of CO2, high purity CO2, that are being vented today in these areas that we're going to help emitters and operators gather that up. The trouble is that although it's meaningful quantities, it's oftentimes for a single facility, it's not enough to justify the cost of sequestering, like drilling a specific well and complying with all the class 2, class 6 requirements to do that. And so what you really need is someone to go out there and gather all the CO2 waste and aggregate it so you can get sufficient scale to properly dispose of it. And that's what we're doing. And at the same time, we're also in discussions with emitters who are wanting to build new facilities that are low carbon facilities. Some of those are direct air capture facilities, which have a different timeline and a much different volume scale at this time. And then we're also looking even further down the line for gas-fired power generation with CCS. And so, we're really trying to think carefully around how do we develop these projects cost effectively, but also do them in a way that we're thinking about the future for growth and expansion. And so that's why we've acquired more land than we need up front, and we're permitting additional wells so that we can give some line of sight to some of these larger sources of emissions that we believe are going to be looking for places to put their CO2 here in the next, say, 5 years.
Oh, very good. And how are you finding the regulatory process so far? Is it, you think it's too tough or too difficult, or they got it about right, or taking too long?
I think the regulatory process took learnings from the past and wanted to make sure that they were being as conservative as they could to do these types of projects safely and securely. So I think the impulse and the direction that regulators took in the beginning to at least steer where they were going was certainly appropriate. What I would say though is over time, as you would expect, we're going to learn how to do things more efficiently and effectively. I'd say right now, I think the process is taking longer than it should, and some of that's it's a function of not having enough staff in some of these regulatory agencies. And so I think in some ways the demand for permits perhaps was more than was anticipated. And so the ability to staff up both at the federal and the state level there's still some catch up that needs to happen there. But then there's also been some areas where some of the regulations were not, there was some ambiguity. And so I think regulators are also having to learn on the fly in some cases and answer questions that they perhaps didn't have answers to ahead of time. So there's a number of reasons why I think things are definitely taking longer than they should, especially on the well permitting side. And as many would probably know and agree with, we think that having primacy for the states, or at least basically the delegation of responsibility or authority to the states by the EPA to approve these wells, class 6 wells, is going to speed up this process considerably. Some may know and some may not know, there are several categories of injection wells that have already been delegated to the states. And the states they have to ask and apply for this, but class 1, class 2, there's many classifications of wells that states can already approve. So we would like to just see class 6 also delegated down to states who are prepared to review and grant these permits.
Oh, and then if you've got any advice for other companies thinking of getting into this, I suppose it's hard work, but there's a pathway and it seems to be working. I don't know if there's any more you'd like to say about it.
Yeah, the only thing I would say here is this is not an area for, I would discourage the DIY thought. I feel like we've talked to some emitters who are not necessarily part of the oil and gas space. A lot of the oil and gas companies have a lot of the expertise and capabilities, competencies in-house already. But there's many industries who want to use CCS that don't have all of those capabilities and competencies. And this is not the kind of activity that you're going to just want to drill a well in your backyard and think that you can go ahead and just start injecting. We need to recognize that, in our modern societies, the idea of collecting waste and disposing of waste responsibly and sustainably, there are whole industries that are built around this. And so I think we need to recognize that carbon dioxide disposal and sequestration is one of those industries. And so we need to go to competent companies that know how to do this, that this is their business, and partner with them and rely on them to do this. I think there are examples where folks have gotten into this and it turns out to be maybe a project that they're not fully prepared to see all the way through the life cycle of the sequestration process. And that's what's really important here. It's not about just getting the permits and getting a project started. It's that monitoring plan. It's that looking all the way through the life cycle of a project. You need companies who have already thought through that and how they're going to address and manage all of that throughout the life of a project. And that's why we think partnering with companies who do this is going to help industry and heavy, energy and heavy industry do this, faster and more efficiently going forward.
Yeah, there's an interesting scale story coming through, because you don't need to be the size of an oil major to do this, but you do need to be big enough to have, well, you can't just be one small industrial company, can't do it. I think that's something you said earlier, and having oil and gas expertise, so you need a certain size company, but it doesn't have to be huge, I suppose. That's the kind of picture coming through here, isn't it? Getting the scale right is important.
Yeah, and I think just companies that have existing operating capabilities. So, the idea of having a safety, health, and environmental culture and processes that you have in your company, these are the kinds of things that they take time to establish and develop. So, Milestone has spent 10 years getting its operating culture kind of up and getting a reputation of being a safe and reliable and prudent operator. And so those are important things. They're very important in the energy industry. I've been to many countries where we go and we have to convince the government that, hey, we know how to do big projects and we can do them safely and sustainably and reliably. And I think the same is true for waste management and waste sequestration.
Yeah, very good. And the emission sources, so you said direct air capture, gas power companies, and I missed the first one. That was sort of small industrial sources, was it, or gas production?
Yeah, so the gas processing facilities are going to be the
right.
earliest ones where we have high purity emissions that are nearby. Yep.
And I guess they have to get the CO2 for regulatory reasons. So that's the business case comes that way, doesn't it? Or you have to produce the gas, you have to get rid of the CO2, and yeah.
Yeah, so the starting point for them is that there are limits on how much carbon dioxide can remain inside a natural gas stream. And so anything above that amount is going to have to be extracted. So that's already happening to make the produced gas saleable.
Okay, well, very good. Well, that's the end of the first 10 minutes. There's 4 questions for you. I don't know if you choose to answer them or not, but if you'd like to answer them by typing, or if you don't want to answer, they're a bit quite broad. But do you have data on the cost per kilogram to capture? Is there a business case for utilization? Is there a delay in permitting because of the lack of expertise in the people people doing the permitting? How long did your company have to pass regular requirements? I don't know what that means before you inject the CO2 into type 2 wells. Thoughts on the new administration?
Yeah,
well, you don't.
Do you want me to fire out those now, or do you want me to wait? We can wait.
Well, you can answer them by typing, or we're doing it at the end, or you can leave them.
Fine.
I don't know if they're
certainly do that.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to the second part now. I'd like to invite Charles to turn your camera on. And yeah, so Charles, you were formerly with Throne Petroleum, I think, and moved into CO2, and Verda has got 7 different projects, I think you're. So yeah, would you like to we're going to start. We're talking about your changing business model. So you said you started looking at transportation and injection. Now you shifted to an emitter first strategy. So maybe we'll start. If you wanted to say what does that mean in an emitter first strategy?
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Charles Fridge. Throne Petroleum I am a 3rd generation oil and gas, individual from Houston, just like Chris and Graham. Verde was started in 2019, really out of necessity. And like Chris said, our company had been in this building for 20 years, and we had been drilling CO2 injection wells for enhanced oil and gas recovery. I will tell you that when we started, we've been flying an airplane while building it at the same time, frankly. This was on January 6th of 2021. Treasury of the United States Treasury gave us, for the first time, bright line rules on a revenue stream of 45Q, who could earn the 45Q tax credit. Obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act in Texas, in the United States, significantly increased competition by increasing 45Q. We started in 2019 because we'd been operating in the Gulf Coast and, like Chris, in West Texas, and had really been focusing on, this is not something new in the United States or around the world. I think there's a TCF of stored CO2 under the state of Texas. This is tried and true technology. We've been drilling these wells since 1979, beginning in Scurry County, Texas. The difference now is we are purposely drilling them for permanent sequestration. We started in 2019, and then by 2020, we started taking injection leases in the US. But really, frankly, it was a waiting game to see which, this business is built a lot on fear and greed. Fear that emitters are going to be shut down for their CO2 emissions. And then when the IRA came in, all of a sudden, trash was treasure. Verde has taken at some point over, options on over 50,000 acres of injection leases. We are a private company. We currently have 17,000 acres in our injection projects, but we did shift to emitters. And so now what Verde does is our projects are all based around an emission contract, and then trying to build that project around it. And that's what we've done. We have 3 capture agreements right now with major emitters for 6.9 million tons of CO2 a year. One of the big things for us is we've shifted entirely. We started early on focusing on all types of emissions, frankly, and the cost of capture varies. The high concentration streams that so many folks are chasing, we decided that we really wanted to focus on electric power generation, combined cycle generation. Frankly, it's something we've been doing for a long time with amine-based technology. The world has for a very long time. Moreover, it's one of those. It's a stream of CO2 from the HRSG that comes out that, frankly, from the emission stack, that is the same if it's in the UK, if it is in West Texas, in South Texas, or in California. The conditioning is the same, and so we got a lot of economies of scale with the EPC work we had done. So really, that's kind of where we are now. As you mentioned earlier, we have 7 projects. We have 2 capture projects where we are in the middle of FEED right now to achieve FID. I would say that, as Chris noted earlier, the subsurface is something that what we've done for a very long time. By the time we take a lease, we feel like we've already done internally and reached our FID. We've acquired seismic. We've looked at faulting. We specifically keep away from historic well bores. A lot of companies are focused, and we have as well looked at injection into historic, like, natural gas fields. Right now, we're storing in Oligocene, Miocene in the Gulf Coast, which Texas and Louisiana is very blessed with fantastic geology in that regard. So we have focused exclusively now on power generation. I will tell you that one of the big challenges is we have about a 3 to 5% hit rate at projects that we look at. And a lot of that has to do with brownfield projects, the age of the actual facility itself, and geography. Do we have enough air? How close can we build the CO2 capture island to the exhaust stack or HRSG? Those are some of the challenges that we have. Natural gas, if you read almost anything, natural gas electricity capture, CO2 capture is challenged financially under the current revenue stream of 45Q. So there's a lot of variables that we have to look at in order to make these projects work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get my head
Carl,
around
sorry,
it.
I probably went a little long on your answer
No,
there.
that's good. Yeah, I mean, on the business, how the business case works. If you're a pure CCS company and you get a tax credit, what do you get the credit against? Does that work as a?
It's a dollar for dollar offset
Yeah.
to income tax. I have to admit, I'm a recovering lawyer, and I've done a lot of, I still have a chip for how many years it's been since I practiced, but I did a lot of onshore wind and solar tax equity partnerships. The Inflation Reduction Act gave us a few years of direct pay. We can talk about that for hours. That's challenged in and of itself. We still feel like the tax equity partnership, our sole source of revenue, is 45Q, and then you generate voluntary credits for the emitter itself. So there's a negotiation with what value can be attributed there. And like I said earlier, it's fear and greed for the emitters now. We found early on in 2021, 2022, everyone was making commitments that they were going to decarbonize their facilities. Some of them were behind the fence. They have their own power generation. It might be managed by a third party. They have Mitsubishi or GE turbines. but they have to decarbonize their facilities. Frankly, no one was really moving very fast, and we were sitting on leases where we were developing sequestration sites. The expense of drilling strat wells or science wells to establish that the geology is what we know it is. So we have focused really on building the capture equipment ourselves. And frankly, it's something that companies like myself and Chris and Graham have done for a very long time. Chris with Exxon, these are, we've hired professionals that have built LNG facilities, process engineers, et cetera. It is an expensive process. The CapEx is very high. And frankly, without creativity and structuring with the emitter, and we're all, the DOE, we'll see what the Trump administration does right now, but the DOE has been giving out government dollars and has a loan program office as well, though I'm not sure if the LPO has actually loaned any money out on these projects yet.
Wow, yeah, it takes a lot of lawyer and financial complexity, isn't it? And just a last question, do you want to talk about the application for the Class 6 wells? Is that going well, do you think, or are you happy about it? You must be doing more than...
Yeah, like Graham said earlier, we're all hoping for primacy. And for those in the UK, that's primary authority is given from the EPA to the state level. The Railroad Commission in Texas, run by Bryce McKee and the group in Austin, and Steve Lee at the Louisiana Department of Energy and Natural Resources are very well set up. We're rooting for Texas to get primacy. I will say that Region 6 of the EPA, which is the region that covers Texas and Louisiana, is really a Ferrari of an office. They have a fantastic geo staff, but there are a lot of applications that have come in. I think right now the quoted time from reaching, you file an application, and you're looking to get authority to construct, which is the EPA has said, the geology is good, your plan is good, your MRV is good. I think they're quoting 24 months, and from the time you're administratively complete. I think they're doing a good job. I think all the organizations, but like Chris said, they're being very careful. And one of the big, aspects in this business is stakeholder engagement. We saw a backlash in Louisiana on a project where there was a community involvement and just fear. And I think the public in general, and that's kind of around the world. We've seen that in the UK as well. And we don't operate there, but just monitoring what's happening. This is technology we've been utilizing for decades, and it's I think what a lot of folks have, a lot of our peers have done in the past, and I think we're all as an industry getting better, is they just marched in because they knew it was safe. And CO2 injection scares people. They don't really understand what we're doing. So we've spent a lot of our time holding town hall meetings in each one of our project areas, speaking in county commissioners' offices, police jurors, which is a local government in Louisiana, and educating the public. And it's amazing when you sit down and you have barbecue or gumbo on a Saturday afternoon with a bunch of folks. We've polled the folks that walk in, and at one event we had 600-700 people. 40 to 50% of the folks were concerned about CCS. We set up stations to educate what we're doing. In Texas and Louisiana, we're blessed because everyone has a family member who is a roustabout or a pumper, et cetera. And once they realize and are educated on what we're doing, we have less than 5% on an exit poll when they leave that are concerned about it. In fact, many of the folks that were concerned want to see if we'll lease their land for CO2 injection.
Oh, well, it's complicated stuff. Well, we'll call an end for the first 10 minutes, but thank you very much, Charles. And I've just made all the questions public. I didn't realize they weren't before, so you can see all the questions and upvote them. But there's a lot of questions about the business model and the politics and how it works after 45Q finishes. But if you want to answer any by typing, you can, or we'll take them at the end. But meanwhile, I'd like to invite Graham to turn the camera on. So Graham is from full name William Graham Payne, Director of Energy Transition from Caliche. He's a geologist formerly at SLB and Battelle. So Graham, would you like to start the projects?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. So little quick intro for my company, Caliche. Caliche is, primarily involved with natural gas storage and underground. So we have two large facilities. We have one in Beaumont, Texas, which is centered around salt cavern storage. We have two caverns there. We're constructing or about to start construction on 3 additional caverns. And then we also have another facility out in Princeton, California at CBGS. And there it's natural gas or depleted storage. So we're storing in an old gas field there with 9 wells. And so traditionally, Caliche has just been in, the natural gas world. But we've been expanding in the past couple of years to involve the secure storage of other industrial gases, including hydrogen, helium, and now CO2. And so our CO2 efforts started a couple of years ago. We had this existing facility in Beaumont, and we knew that the geology there was really, really great. We had an established facility, and so we wanted to look at the feasibility of establishing a CCS project there. And so after we spoke with the city, we were able to secure some acreage. And so, we're talking with a lot of the emitters that are in Beaumont, Jefferson County. I think if it's one of the largest concentrated sources of CO2 emitters in the country. And so for us, it's a very, very short pipeline to connect all these potential customers to this sequestration site, which is right in their backyard. And so right now we put in our permit to construct back in May of 2024. So we're hoping to get our permit by May of 2026. So the project that we're trying to develop right now, it's south of the city on about 2,500 acres of land. We're planning to inject 2 million tons a year with 3 different injector wells. And we have a slightly different outlook on the PISC. For the EPA, they require you to have 50 years of post-injection site care monitoring. But we're also trying to expand this project to include potential tax credits from the California LCFS tax credits. And that mandates that you have a longer 100-year PISC period. So we're trying to differentiate ourselves and have a wider range of potential tax incentives open to our customers.
Wow. So you're monitoring with seismic, or you don't know what you're doing 100 years time, I suppose.
We have a whole suite of different monitoring technologies, all the way from seismic, where you're monitoring the plume directly, all the way up through the above zone, through the vadose zone, soil gas, atmospheric, the whole suite of required monitoring technologies we're going to use.
Oh, very good. No, I don't think you mentioned emitters. Is that confidential? Or are you able to say?
So we haven't secured an emitter yet, but because Beaumont, Port Arthur, Jefferson County,
Yeah.
there's a lot of ongoing refining operations, chemical operations. There's a lot of power generation in the area, and so there's a lot of CO2 emitters there. We've been speaking to nearly all of them.
Right. I mean, a lot of people are asking about the business model, but I guess even if they're not obliged to cut carbon now, they presumably think they will be, and this is the direction they want to go in, is it? Or, yeah.
Yeah, so all of our potential customers that we've been speaking with, their new projects that they're bringing on, their new facilities, whether they're new refineries or whether they're new power plants, they're all engineering and putting in a carbon capture component in their designs. Some of the older ones where the operational life of the facility is, well past its prime, they're not looking at retrofitting those plants, but everything new and that's young that we've been speaking with, they're interested in carbon capture. They want to, decarbonize their industries. They want to be able to capture those tax credits and, be seen as forward-looking companies.
Oh, very good. And then it's very unusual, this gas storage background. How helpful has that been in CO2 storage? I mean, I guess there's some overlap, but perhaps not much, is there? Or is there quite a lot of overlap to?
Well, there's a lot of overlap in terms of, understanding the geology, understanding, ongoing surface operations with injection, withdrawal, safe storage of gas. I come from a geology background. And so, my whole angle on looking at potential CCS project is really centered around the location. It's proximity to sources, what the geology underground your feet looks like, where your customers are, like how you can build a meaningful project. If you don't have really good geology within, 20, 30 miles of your project, if you're not connected to existing, CO2 pipeline infrastructure, you might not be able to meaningfully or feasibly decarbonize. You really need to be able to identify these low hanging fruit, high potential opportunities when you're looking at this space.
So it's more about commercial expertise or technical expertise, or both commercial and technical, I guess, in knowing
Yeah,
the story.
both.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think it looks like you've been involved in CO2 storage perhaps 15 years, I think, from your LinkedIn page. So I guess you've seen this whole market
Yeah,
evolve.
so previously with SLB, I was working at their ADM facility, and so that was kind of the first large industrial scale project with IBDP, where they were injecting 1 million tons over 3 years or so, and then they moved on with ICCS. And then Battelle has been involved with these projects for a long time, for the past couple of decades, going back with different DOE projects and regional partnership projects, and so long history, yeah.
Yeah, does that make you feel a bit, I mean, a lot of people are nervous about the regulation, but I mean, so in the UK, the regulation's changed so much in 10 years, you kind of think that the general trend is positive, even if it goes up and down with different administrations. I don't know, perhaps you get that same perspective.
Yeah, Caliche, we're actually very pleased with the very conservative approach that both federal regulators and state regulators are taking. We see the importance of, safety is obviously important for every single company, but it is with Caliche as well. We take the responsibility of public safety and the protection of USDW stewardship very, very seriously. And so them taking a long time to make sure that the modeling work is done correctly, that, we have the right sort of monitoring approach and technologies in place. We see that as very, very encouraging. We like that.
Yeah, and then for the 45Q, I guess you're probably dependent on it now, like everyone else. But I guess hopefully seeing a way when you wouldn't be dependent on it, or I don't know. Do you want to...
Well, right now the 45Q tax credits, being around 40 or $85 a ton, those were put in place with the IRA, and so those haven't been indexed to inflation at all. And so a lot of the projects that we've been looking at, the potential projects outside of this one in Beaumont, the economics for them, they're becoming not, completely undoable, but, they need to be updated. We want to see continued legislative support for these kind of projects that we want to put in.
Yeah, I guess it's tough for everyone, but yeah, I guess not much we can do about that, but I guess there's going to be a business, or should be a business of some kind,
Sure. Yeah. It's just, is the public willing to have a less carbon intense price to the products they buy and the services they use? It needs to be an integrated part of that pricing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. Well, if we go on to the next session with the Q&A, so I invite Charles and Chris to put their cameras on, and if everybody opens the Q&A box. So if you see with the questions, you can actually upvote questions and sort questions out for the ones you like. So if I can ask the audience to help by ticking the thumbs up on questions you like, although I'm not sure we want to get into politics. I can see second question, Juan Agudelo, thoughts on the impact of CCS from the new administration. There's a question with 2 upvotes talking about methane emissions. I think maybe we're not going to talk about methane emissions today. I think that's a different subject. Yeah, Peter Liu asking about, is the business model working? Juan Agudelo, 45Q enough? Thoughts on sources of revenue after the 12 years of the incentive? Maybe, perhaps this is the biggest question to...
Yeah, Karl, Chris, you're a really fast typer. So Chris already answering these.
Oh.
Milestone's usually ahead of everyone else. I look down and
Just hanging out there.
Chris, it's good to see you, by the way.
Good to see you too.
Let me address that, because I think that's one of the things that Graham and Chris and I and all of our, every CCS developer is dealing with right now. Right now, we have to underwrite to 12-year 45Q. I will tell you that I think obviously Chris and Graham and I are proponents of this business. We have a hard time believing that federal government is going to just have a shutdown and there will be no source of revenue after year 12. For instance, all of our agreements right now that we have with, one is greenfield being built and 2 are brownfield facilities. That won't get into much detail, but they are power generation at different. One's a petrochemical plant, one is a different type of facility. But I will tell you that we are expecting some type of revenue We have 12-year contracts with 10-year extensions or 5-year extensions up to 40 years. If you look historically at the solar tax credit, it's been extended 8 times over 20 years. So we're rooting that will happen. We also believe that this is tried and true technology and necessary. And I joke all the time that we're doing the Lord's work and really making really CCS is the one of the most tried and true ways to really achieve goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so we believe that the tax credit will continue. Voluntary credits are another issue right now as well in structuring these agreements because the emitter will earn some type of credit and working with the large trading operations, the VTOLs of the world, the folks that trade these credits. It's hard to see what a credit is going to look, what it's going to look like when we come online in 3 years or 4 years of facility. So I just caught that question on 12 years. That's one of the things that I think I get asked by every emitter, financial partner, infra funds once we get to FID is, will we go beyond 12 years? And we think strongly, I mean, the equipment we're building is a 30-year piece of equipment with proper maintenance and extensions to 50 years. So there's my question because I can't type as fast as Chris can.
Oh, very good. We've got a couple of technical questions going to the top of the list here. So Benjamin Cross is Senior Advisor at New Synergy Energy in Aiken, South Carolina, according to his LinkedIn. Any issues associated with building new CO2 pipelines? I think it was Chris was talking about the problem with the local. Well, we're not. I mean, I can't remember who was. Anybody want anything about pipelines? Anybody would like to say about?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say here, I think it's definitely a more of a local phenomenon in terms of how communities feel about it. And this is something that's, we can't get away from the participation and collaboration with communities when we're doing project development in our current world. And some communities are more comfortable and familiar with pipeline development than others. And so that has certainly, I think, steered us into the areas that we're in. The Permian Basin is very, very comfortable and familiar with laying a pipeline. In the US, we have over 5,000 miles of pipelines and safe operation. It's got a fantastic safety history. I also remind everybody there's no industry that is immune from any kind of safety incidents. And so I think if you look carefully at the CO2 pipeline operational history, it's actually quite strong. And we have very good, competent companies that are running those pipelines. I see the CO2 pipeline industry kind of growing like we saw natural gas pipelines. So I think we're going to see some regional clusters where source to sink pipelines are going to be laid from the emitter to the sequestration locations. And then over time, we're going to see some larger trunk lines that are going to connect the regional ones. We also saw companies who were trying to go and go even further and build large scale pipeline projects from the get-go. And so far, it looks like that's probably just a bridge too far. It's quite complicated. And a lot of it has to do with just the communities you're going in. It's very much a local issue. Some communities are fine and very comfortable. Others are not. And they're going to demand to be educated and make sure that they understand who you are and what credentials you have to be laying and operating such pipelines in the future. So my hope is that we can start in the areas that are comfortable and do this with experienced companies. And so we can have an operational history that can then help other communities that are perhaps less familiar, less comfortable get there. And I think that's just going to be time, and we got to execute projects where we can execute them quickly. And you're not going to be able to force a project through a community that's not ready for it. It's just not going to happen.
Very good. So we've got 6 upvotes for a question from Carolyn Newen, who's a Energy Act analyst with fact about avoiding storage projects in regions with legacy active wells because they can be potential leakage pathways. Somebody was saying you're only doing aquifers. I think that was Chris, wasn't it? I don't know if anybody would like to say anything more about the sort of reservoirs.
Yeah, I'd like to put a little bit into that. So depending on where you are in the US, looking at legacy or active oil and gas wells is almost impossible. When you're looking at your AOR, you're going to have some level of interaction with some of these legacy wells. And if you don't, it's usually because you're in an area that isn't as well explored. It doesn't have the same sort of, log suites that are available when you're doing the reservoir evaluation for that first part of the permit. And so going through and identifying, all of the all of the artificial penetrations that are in your AOR and the surrounding place is really, really important. Before we got on the call, we were chatting a little bit about that, going through all the P&A records, the well log records, and making sure that you identify which wells you need to go in and do any sort of remediation, is important. But if you come across an area where you have a number of wells that were abandoned, in the mid 1900s, and the completion P&A practices, weren't as good, those can definitely be more risky areas.
Yeah, AOR, area review, I think, isn't it? That's the jargon.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's stuff is turning out to be much harder than people expected it to be. The whole reviewing the area and the this stuff
Right,
like
and
that.
where the plume goes, it can be dictated by, or it can be influenced by your completion strategy and where you inject, and over what timeline and what depths. But at the same time, the rock is the rock, and so you need to tailor the project and your monitoring strategy specific to the project, and not how you like to build it. You need to build it how it actually needs to be.
Oh, very good. So if we go to Griff Walker, who's with Development Associate with Clean Cycle Carbon, he's asking, I don't know, RNG, I guess the NG is natural gas. I don't know if you might have to help me here. What do you see feasibility for small scale CCUS from RNG point source emissions? Chris, we talked about scale. I guess the seems to be a conclusion that you need a certain scale, but you can go fairly small. I don't know if anybody wants to give a perspective on if anybody knows what RNG means.
I assume that's renewable natural gas.
Renewable.
Okay, I'm
Hang
going to
on.
run with that. Chris mentioned, we have in Texas, at least, we have a Class 2 process. I know that Milestone's executing on it, quite a few other folks. It has to do with capture from natural gas processing facilities. And they have to have an MRV program as well. That is a great way to get a project moving. We've looked at quite a few of those. I know that quite a few of our peers, and we're rooting for them on that process. But it's the same monitoring MRV program that you need to have for a Class 6 well application. But I don't think I have any comments, gentlemen, on RNG.
Oh, very good. So next, got a question from my friend Jez Cosman, who's an expert on data management in oil and gas, based in Houston. He's asking about managing the data during the monitoring of the wells. Should we go to Chris? We haven't heard from you for a while. I guess you're a reservoir engineer. You know about how to manage data from well, actually, not managing data. That's a lot of data involved in. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we do deal with a lot of data, that's for sure. So we submitted
Yeah.
our first MRV plan for the Delaware Basin back in August. I think we're almost to the finish line there, doing the Q&A with the EPA Air Office, and we're preparing the MRV plan for the Midland Basin now, based on those learnings as well. But yeah, so all of our wells are primarily, there could be some exceptions here in the future, but we're generally looking to go in, run fiber optic cable, collect a lot of different information from microseismic to pressure temperature data. And in addition to that, we're going to be running seismic survey data over time to basically establish where the plume is moving in the subsurface. We're also looking at electromagnetic surveys where that's more appropriate for monitoring what's happening in the subsurface. We will have monitoring wells that are in zone. We're looking at the combination of both in zone and above zone for monitoring purposes here. So we've got a number of different approaches that we're taking. And I think you're starting to see, I think, different patterns and design kind of philosophies emerge on how to do these types of projects, depending on the scale and where you're located. So we feel very comfortable about that. But to me, it's the MRV piece is so critical that you have a robust plan and you are prepared to execute on that plan over an extended period of time. That's really where I feel like this makes this a real industry where you have companies that last, many decades, because these activities are not going to stop after year 12. I agree with what Charles said. I think we're designing our facilities to operate for decades. And that includes even higher quality materials in the wellbore so that we can do that. And we're looking at monitoring for long periods of time. If you were only going to do this for 10 or 12 years, the cost of putting all that monitoring equipment in really it's kind of hard to justify.
Yeah, I heard a presentation from ExxonMobil research about ground heave in December. That's when you have tiny millimeters changes in the ground. And then it's another one about looking at gravity. I guess there's a whole lot of new thinking going on into the monitoring. It's not like it's settled how to do it yet, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, that's right. And I will also say, the types of monitoring that probably Exxon's looking at will also depend on the scale of the operation. So what Milestone is hoping to help move forward with other companies, having these smaller scale projects that are they're still meaningful projects, but they're smaller scale and they're disparate. There's not just 1 or 2 or 5 of them. You know, we want to see many dozens of these across, you know, in the United States. We want to see many of these. And then over time, you're going to see bigger companies come in and scale that up to reach the gigaton goals that we're really talking about.
Yeah, well, what companies need to think about the structure of the data management? I know subsurface data management is almost an art form or a craft in how complicated it gets and how companies have to put in robust systems to do it. But I guess we're going to need something like that for this, won't we, I suppose, is a
Karl, the great news is that, I mean, the oil and gas industry, these are well-trodden paths. So in terms of the data management, how we collect it, how we use it to infer different data and characteristics and analysis of the health of your well, the health of the reservoir, the extent of where the plume's moving around, what types of actions you may take. The other piece that people, I think also, this is sort of behind the scenes, is that it's not like you just do this project from construction and then set it and forget it. We're going to be constantly monitoring, and you may need to change how you're injecting CO2 into the subsurface. So we're looking at permitting multiple intervals where that's appropriate, so we can move CO2 around in the subsurface in the formation if that's necessary, and looking at having multiple wells within our hub sites so that we can then also kind of shift between so that we're optimally filling the caverns or filling the space as it were. So again, it's not this is why I always say, don't think of this as a DIY project. It's not laying floor in your new house and you kind of lay it there and it's good to go for the next while. I mean, this is something that people are going to need to tend to over time and watch, and that's why you need these kinds of companies to execute.
Oh, very good. There's a couple of questions. They look a little bit, I don't know if we're going to cover them. One was Richard Chandros asking, curious to know if the National Petroleum Council estimates of capture costs from 2020 are accurate in real life. And Eric Rosenfeld is asking any thoughts on 45Q expansion to include methane. I don't know if anybody might be getting a little bit off topic with these ones, so I don't know anything about anybody anything want to add about either of those two, do they? Or? No. Well, perhaps we'll go to Nancy House. Can you comment on the trade-offs between knowledge gained from previous oil and gas development versus risk of legacy wells? I don't know what that question means. Well, I mean, the risk of legacy wells is not much relationship to the knowledge from previous oil and gas development. I don't know if it's
I think Graham and Chris both hit that well, and as the only non-engineer or geoscientist, I won't comment too much, but I will tell you that we have to, as these gentlemen know, and anyone in the business knows, we have to take corrective action, or we have to put a plan in place if the CO2 is going to interact with either or the area of review, which is the pressure wave created by the CO2 plume. It absolutely, and I think I don't want to beat a dead horse, is one of the things that we look at when we take an injection lease. Not all acreage is equal, even if the geology is similar, because of artificial penetrations. The EPA is concerned about it, and we are as well. And I think it was Graham, perhaps, that was mentioning earlier, the corrective action that we have to take. Some of these P&A wells, and frankly, there are wells that unfortunately we've learned when we run tests for this that aren't even in the Railroad Commission or the LDNR. There's historic wells out there, and so those penetrations have to be dealt with. And this is not a traditional P&A that's $30,000 or $50,000. These can be 7-figure P&A, corrective action, and so that's a big factor. One of the myriad of factors to making this making a successful project.
Oh, very good. This question from Wynne Warren. I'm just referring back to Daniel's Midland pooling injection of carbon dioxide in Illinois. I don't think either of you will want to comment on that. I don't think, since you're not involved in it, unless I'm wrong. Kenneth Langren is asking, Chris, I have numbers pulled from Energy Information Authority. I think the estimates of the cost to capture, transport, store, monitor CO2 emissions from natural gas range from $0.04 to $0.15 per kilogram. Does that sound accurate? You may not want to talk about numbers. Maybe should I pass on this one?
It just varies too much. I think Charles mentioned this earlier. There's so many factors. I know that's an answer no one likes, but it is the truth. It varies a lot. I will comment on, I guess it's Wynne Warren's previous question around the gas processors venting of CO2 into the atmosphere. So, I mean, yes, that is happening. That's why they want to take action. Again, it's back to, it's of a certain scale that the cost to actually dispose of it would be not cost, it's not economic for individual facilities, because the sizes are, maybe less than 100,000 tons per year, for example. But if you're able to gather up enough emissions, you can get to a scale where it is economic. And so that's where we're stepping in to help them. And so, I mean, we are where we are, and so things were allowed in the past, and so we need to find ways to help existing facilities transition. And I mean, that's just a reality. And so we want to be part of the solution for doing that. And so we're just glad that the gas processing companies want to be a part of the solution. So that's why we're doing it.
Oh, very good. So this next one could be interesting. Erica Pham. So she's from a large emitting company. I'm just looking at Moat Hydrogen website, but I can't really see. But yeah, are there prospects to storage in California, Louisiana, or Georgia? I know that Verda has a Louisiana, but of course it depends where. I don't know if I mean, in a general sense, I suppose you're welcome to have discussions, but it may or may not work. I suppose. Is there anything more to say to big emitters?
So in California, they just got their permit to construct in Kern. There are a couple of potential projects that are going on in the Sacramento Basin. So there are a bunch of prospective sites there, and they have a little bit of a different risk with seismicity compared to our sites on the Gulf Coast, and so it's just a different kind of animal. But in Louisiana, again, it's very similar to geology to what we have in Texas, either in the Miocene sands or in the deep Frio. There's in almost most of the place, unless you're looking in the northeast of the United States, onshore storage, there's always some sort of basin around that might make sense depending on proximity and location of your source and where you might put it.
Oh, very good.
Comment on the other one that Graham's right. They've got some great projects. One of the issues or complexities that's added in California is in the United States, the right to inject CO2 generally falls with the surface owner. Surface owners in California are very fractionated. We looked at projects in several areas of California. There's some great geology there, but you've got to be able to put the land position together. And even though there's some large CRC and others that have mineral rights, there's a complexity there in acquiring enough acreage that you can safely store CO2.
Oh, very good. We've got about 7 minutes left. Still got about 16 questions. The audience, if you want to help me by pressing the upvote button on questions you like, but perhaps I'll just skim through a few and see if you want to jump in. And so Nancy House is asking about if you can convert a gas pipeline to CO2. Win Warren, I think that's talking about gas processing in CO2. I think that's a bit off the scope. Jez Cosman, the data manager, is saying if you've got wells in your area review, that if the data, I guess that's always Richard Chandros is clarifying. Oh, the questions are all in a different order. That renewable natural gas is biogas. Uma Khan, do you inject in CO in existing wells or drill new wells? I think we drill new wells. I think that's very clear. I don't know if there's anybody wants to answer any of these.
I might jump on the director capture. There was a
great.
question on director capture in there. I was just going to say that with director capture companies, oftentimes the technology for there's a whole different slate of technologies out there right now that are trying to demonstrate commercial viability. Many of which that already have existing facilities or pilot facilities in either the U.S. or other international locations. So we're working directly with director capture companies to basically fold them into our developments. Oftentimes the scale is not sufficient to anchor a single well or a single development with just one director capture facility. And so that's why we think it's important to have a gathering of CO2 from multiple sources. And we think the Permian Basin is one of several really attractive locations for director capture. I'll also say for things that you may not have even thought about, some technologies for director capture require limestone, and there is ample amount of limestone available in the Permian Basin. Not to mention, we've got a lot of just existing infrastructure, transmission lines going all over the place. And despite it being the Permian Basin, there is access to shallow water and low level heat for some of those facilities. And so, I actually think director capture folding into developments that are anchored by larger emitters is a really good way for us to demonstrate those technologies and help them in their scale-up journey.
Oh, yeah. There's Stefan Hartel. So we've got 5 upvotes. Perhaps it's a good one to finish on. The top 3 obstacles to signing up potential capture partners for a CCS hub. I would imagine the biggest obstacle is they can't afford it, is it? But I don't know if it's very expensive. And you're laughing, Graham. Is that you want to take this one?
I can take at least part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think part of it is just it's a risk, right? It's such a long-term outlook for a project, you know, like Chris and Charles were saying, you know, you're looking at a project where the tax incentives only go up for 12 years, but the project itself is probably designed for 30 or 50 years. And so it's a large CapEx investment that these emitters are having to put in to install the capture technology. And that's the most expensive component to this. The storage piece, you know, it isn't an afterthought, but it's a lesser cost. And so trying to determine that, yes, we were going to commit to this for the next several decades is a challenging one for a lot of business operators to make.
Wow, and there's no shortcut. I guess you have to make a guess on where you think politics, I suppose, comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's Karl. Graham's right, and we experienced that when we started Verde. You know, not that what Chris and Graham and our company does from a transportation or sequestration is trivial at all, but it's not new technology. And to steal a phrase from Chris, this is not something you should be doing yourself. And I think that's one of the lessons that folks have learned. There's a few. I noticed a question on ADM. We can talk about metallurgy all day long, but it's a hard decision for a board to make to spend anywhere from $200 million to $1 billion to build capture equipment. That's why we at Verde focused on building it ourselves. We've been building equipment for a long time, and so then it comes into the complexity of either the location for stick building a new capture island, et cetera. And the commercial agreements are just paramount importance. You know, does the turbine have enough? Does it have enough capacity to provide power to our capture island? Is there excess steam available for us? Is there water, et cetera? What are we getting charged for those electrons? So there are a myriad of complexities in structuring these agreements, but they're getting done. And we're excited about it and we're rooting for all of our competitors. That's why I know Chris and Grant, because, you know, rising tides rise all ships. We're rooting for their projects as well.
Yeah, perhaps we'll give the last word to Chris. I was thinking because you're an industrial waste company, so as a waste company, you don't have people having to worry about why they should give you the waste. They already want to give it to you before they've opened the conversation, I suppose, haven't they? But if you come up with a waste mindset, it's a
Yeah, that's right. I think we're going to start to look at CO2 as just another waste stream. There was a question about reuse. I think there will be an opportunity for reuse down the road, but that's everything just takes time, and so we need to look at CO2 as it's another waste product. We need to find ways to responsibly and sustainably dispose of it. You know, the idea that we can produce all of this energy and not abate some of the effects that come from producing hydrocarbons, I'm a big supporter of that, is, you know, to me, it's kind of anathema. We need to think about how we kind of do this in a more sustainable way so we can have affordable energy for everybody, but we're also taking care of the planet while we're doing that. And so, and to I guess the last question you posed, yeah, I think I definitely agree with what I've heard here from Graham and Charles. I would call it fiscal stability and policy stability. I mean, we're making decadal investments. If you're an emitter, I mean, these are long-term investments. You need to know that you're going to have fiscal stability or policy stability or regulatory stability, so that you will have the time to recover all of those dollars that you're putting to work. It's a lot of risk to take. So I think I'm an optimist. I think we're going to get there. I think despite a lot of the political divide in the United States, I think we're going to find a way to help this part of the equation move forward and to help us all kind of reach those net zero goals that we're starting to put out there.
well, we've got about a minute left. I don't know if Graham and Charles, you want to give a 20 seconds last word or anything you'd like to? Charles first, maybe.
Graham? Look, we appreciate you putting this on. It's been fantastic to see my colleagues here in the industry. We are optimistic about the Trump administration treating of the IRA. I think, frankly, because what we're doing is necessary, and we're rooting the IRA doesn't get gutted too badly for our brethren in hydrogen and other type of new greenfield projects. So thank you for having us today, Karl.
Graham, any last word?
No, just thank you for having me.
Well,
Appreciate
that's
it.
great. Well, I think it's been a fantastic webinar, a whole new perspective on CO2 storage, and hopefully been very interesting for everyone in the audience. And thank you very much, Graham, Charles, and Chris. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. And the next Carbon Capture Journal and Decarb Connect webinar is on February the 28th. We're going to look at developments in the UK storage. So, goodbye. Well.
Thank you, Carl.